She let a trembling child sleep in the last booth while she mopped floors, ignoring the late-night rules. What she didn't know, the boy was the Vampire King's heir, and his father had been stationed in the parking lot all night, waiting to see if one human would choose kindness over fear. The moment she tucked a blanket around him, the king walked through the door she thought she'd locked. The door chimed at exactly 3:47 in the morning, and Maya's head snapped up from where she'd been wiping down the counter for the third time that hour, her mind half gone into that fuzzy space between exhaustion and caffeine, where thoughts moved like shadows through fog. And she'd locked that door at 3:30 like she always did, because the regulations were clear about closing procedures, even if nobody ever checked. And the sound of the deadbolt sliding home was part of her nightly rhythm, as familiar as breathing. But there he stood just inside the entrance. A tall man in an expensive dark coat that looked wrong under the harsh fluorescent buzz of Lucky's diner. Rain beating on the fabric in perfect spheres that didn't run or drip the way water should, and Maya's stomach dropped because impossible things didn't happen on Route 9, except apparently they did. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. He didn't cross the threshold fully, his polished shoes stopping precisely at the tile line where the rubber entry mat ended and the scuffed linoleum began, as though some invisible boundary held him there. And when he spoke, his voice was formal and accented with something old European that she couldn't place, careful and measured, like each word had been selected from a dictionary written in a language that predated English. "You showed my son kindness," he said, and gestured toward booth 12, where the child still slept curled under Maya's coat. "That is rare." Maya's mind stuttered over the words because she thought the boy was abandoned, had thought she was breaking policy to help a kid in trouble. And now this man with his predator stillness and his impossible entrance through a locked door was calling the child his son, and her hands tightened on the coffee pot she'd been holding. The boy woke then as if summoned by his father's voice, sitting up without the confusion of sleep, eyes already alert and ancient in his small face, and he scrambled from the booth and ran across the diner floor in socks that squelched with rainwater, throwing himself at the man with a wordless cry in a language Maya didn't recognize, something that sounded like wind through stone corridors. The man caught him easily, one hand settling on the boy's wet hair with surprising gentleness, and looked at Maya with eyes that were too dark, too still, too knowing. "I am Lucien Draculeshti," he said. "This is my son Nikolai. And you have just passed a test you did not know you were taking." Maya set down the coffee pot because her hands were shaking, and tests meant watchers meant every choice she'd made tonight had been observed and judged, and she thought about the moment 2 hours ago when she'd first seen the boy standing outside in the rain. Thought about how she'd violated diner policy without hesitation, because she knew what it felt like to be 7 years old with nowhere safe to go. Knew it in her bones and her blood, and the scar tissue of her childhood. "What kind of test?" she managed to ask, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was a small victory. Lucien's hand continued to stroke Nikolai's hair, and the boy pressed against his father's side like he was trying to disappear into him. And when Lucien spoke again, his voice carried the weight of something vast and old and tired. "Nikolai has not spoken since his mother was killed 6 months ago," he said, the words carefully neutral in a way that suggested oceans of grief beneath frozen surface. "He does not trust. He does not sleep. He barely consents to exist. And I have searched for someone who would protect him without being asked, without expectation of reward." Maya's throat tightened because she understood trauma in the way only people who'd lived it could understand, knew how it rewired a child's brain until trust became a foreign language and safety, a concept that no longer translated. And she looked at Nikolai's face and saw herself at his age, hollow-eyed and careful, and so desperately alone. 43 candidates across 3 states, Lucien continued. 43 humans who saw a cold, wet child and called the police or walked away, or in one memorable case attempted to ransom him back to me. You gave him your coat. You told him he was safe. You asked for nothing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and rain hammered against the windows, and Maya processed this information, while her rational mind screamed that this was insane, that men didn't appear through locked doors, and children weren't used as bait for tests, and none of this could be real, except it was. She could see it in Nikolai's ancient eyes, and feel it in the way the air had changed when Lucian entered, heavier somehow, charged with something that made her skin prickle. "What do you want from me?" Maya asked, because there was always a cost. The world had taught her that lesson early and often. "Come to Blackthorn Estate as Nikolai's companion," Lucian said, and produced an envelope from inside his coat, the paper heavy and cream-colored and sealed with silver wax. "The salary will clear your brother's medical debt in 6 months." Maya's breath stopped in her lungs because she'd never mentioned Marcus to anyone at the diner, never talked about the accident or the surgeries or the insurance company's endless denials, and the fact that this stranger knew her deepest worry should have terrified her. But instead, it felt like being seen, really seen, for the first time in 3 years. "You would live at the estate under my protection," Lucien continued as he placed the envelope on the counter between them, "bound by laws you do not yet understand, unable to leave without my permission, unable to tell anyone where you have gone." Maya's hand hovered over the envelope, and she could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders like gravity had suddenly increased. Because this was every horror story her foster parents had warned her about, every cautionary tale about strangers and too-good offers and girls who disappeared. But she looked at Nikolai and saw the same haunted expression she'd seen in her own mirror at his age, and something in her chest cracked open. "How long?" she asked, and Lucien's dark eyes held hers with an intensity that felt like drowning. "1 year," he said. "Read carefully, Miss Chen, particularly the clause about threshold law and the covenant of sanctuary. You have until sunrise to decide. 4 hours." Then he turned, and Nikolai followed, and they walked to the door that shouldn't have opened, and when it did, Maya saw that the darkness outside wasn't quite natural, wasn't quite right, and then they were gone, and she was alone with an envelope and a choice that felt like standing on a cliff edge in the dark. She read the contract by the pale light of the pie display case, because the overhead fluorescence suddenly felt too harsh, her hands trembling as she unfolded page after page of dense text written in silver ink that seemed to shimmer faintly, archaic formal language full of whereases and therefores and clauses within clauses, but 3 sections stood out like spotlights cutting through fog. First, she would serve as Nikolai's companion for exactly 1 year, no more and no less. The specificity feeling important in ways she couldn't articulate. Second, she would reside at Blackthorn Estate under the Vampire King's protection, and there it was, the word vampire written plainly, as if it were perfectly normal to contract with creatures that shouldn't exist. And Maya's laugh came out high and slightly hysterical, because of course the beautiful dangerous man was a vampire, and she'd let his son sleep in her diner. Third and most troubling, she could not leave the estate without Lucien's explicit permission, threshold law binding her once she crossed certain boundaries with certain beings, the rules of reality shifting in ways that transcended mere physical presence. The salary was listed in precise numbers, $180,000 paid in full upon signing. And Maya set the contract down and pressed her palms against her eyes because this was insane, but Marcus needed that surgery, needed it desperately because without it, he'd lose function in his left arm, the arm he needed for the carpentry apprenticeship that was his only shot at a real future after the accident that had nearly killed him. She thought about her studio apartment above the laundromat where the hot water only worked on Tuesdays, and the walls were thin enough to hear every spin cycle. Thought about her nursing degree that had died 3 years ago under the weight of her mother's final illness, and the astronomical medical bills that had followed. Thought about working the graveyard shift at Lucky's Diner for $3 an hour, plus tips that barely covered rent. She thought about Nikolai's face, about the way he'd looked at her when she'd draped her coat around him, about the recognition in his eyes because damaged children knew each other on sight, could smell the trauma on each other like wolves scenting blood. The clock above the grill showed 6:52, and the sky beyond the windows was starting to lighten from black to charcoal gray, and Maya knew she was going to sign, had known from the moment she saw the amount, from the moment she remembered being 7 and alone and praying for someone to choose her. She found a pen in the cup beside the register, and her hand was steady as she signed her name at the bottom of the final page, the ink flowing smooth and dark, and only when she set the pen down did she notice the small bead of blood welling from her index finger. The pen's tip sharp enough to pierce skin without her feeling it, her signature written not in black but in red. At 7:23, the first real light of dawn broke through the diner windows, pink and gold and achingly beautiful, and Maya folded the contract carefully and slid it back into the envelope and waited. Lucian returned at precisely 7:30, with Nikolai silent at his side, and Maya had the envelope ready, her heart hammering against her ribs, and when she handed it over and he opened it to examine her signature, something shifted in his expression, some crack in that perfect ancient control. "You signed in your own blood," he said, and it wasn't a question, and Maya looked at her finger, at the tiny puncture mark she'd dismissed as accident. The pen was designed to draw blood, she said. And it wasn't really a question either, because she was starting to understand the rules of this new world, where everything had weight and meaning and nothing happened by chance. "This makes the contract binding under old law," Lucian said, his voice carrying something that might have been regret or might have been satisfaction. "You are no longer simply an employee, Miss Chen. You are covenant-bound, under my protection, yes, but also under my authority." Before Maya could protest, before she could ask what that meant, or demand clarification, or change her mind, Lucian touched the contract, and it burst into silver flame that was cold instead of hot. The ash that remained swirling in the air before searing itself into her left wrist in the shape of a crescent moon wrapped in thorns, and she gasped at the sensation which was pain but also recognition, her body understanding what her mind was still processing. "Welcome to the old world, Miss Chen," Lucian said, and offered his hand. And when Maya took it, his skin was cool and impossibly smooth, his grip gentle despite the strength she could feel coiled beneath. They left through the diner's back door into a parking lot where a black Bentley waited, vintage and pristine and purring like a predator, all curves and chrome and predatory elegance. Nikolai climbed into the back seat without hesitation, and Maya slid into the passenger seat and watched through the side mirror as Lucky's diner grew smaller and smaller until the road curved and it disappeared entirely, and she thought about the life she was leaving, the studio apartment and the night shifts, and the careful budget that never quite stretched far enough. Nikolai's hand appeared between the seats and touched her shoulder, just a brief press of small fingers. But it was the first voluntary touch he'd offered, and Maya covered his hand with hers and felt something in her chest crack open. They drove west away from the sunrise into forests that seemed older than time, the roads becoming narrower and more winding, the light that filtered through the canopy green and strange, and after 90 minutes that felt like 9 hours. And also 9 minutes, they emerged into a clearing where Blackthorn Estate rose against the sky. The manor was Gothic and impossible, all towers and gargoyles and windows like watching eyes, and the gates were wrought iron worked into patterns that hurt to look at directly, and Maya's rational mind tried to reject what she was seeing, but her body understood. Her blood understood, because the mark on her wrist was warm and pulsing in time with her heartbeat. "Blackthorn exists in threshold space," Lucienne explained as the gate swung open with a sound like singing metal. "Time moves differently here. Outside one day might be 3 inside or 10, and Maya's alarm spiked sharp and immediate because she could lose years, could age while Marcus waited for surgery that never came. Not while under contract, Lucian clarified, before she could voice the fear. Your year will be a year as you measure it, but you will feel the weight of this place. The gargoyles on the gate posts turned their stone heads to watch as they passed, and Maya stopped trying to make sense of it, stopped trying to fit the impossible into boxes labeled rational thought. Inside, the grand entrance hall soared 3 stories high, dominated by a chandelier constructed from bones and crystal in equal measure, and staff moved through the shadows at the edges of the room, silent figures in dark clothing who bowed to Lucian as he passed, and Maya realized with creeping dread that they were all vampires, all of them beautiful and terrible and perfectly still in that way that living things never were. Lucian led her through corridors that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, and up a spiral staircase that climbed higher than the tower should have allowed, and finally to a door carved with protective symbols. Your room, he said, and opened it to reveal a space 3 times the size of her entire apartment. All dark wood and velvet curtains, and a bed that could sleep 4. For your protection, the door locks from the outside at night. Next door was Nicolay's room, and when Lucian opened that door, Maya's heart broke a little because the space was full of toys that had never been played with, and books that had never been read, and the walls were covered in drawings, dozens of them, all showing the same woman with dark flowing hair and kind eyes, and a crown that looked like thorns. He has not spoken since she died, Lucian said quietly. He will not eat unless I compel him. He does not sleep unless exhausted. You will help him remember how to be a child. Maya looked at this vampire king with his ancient eyes and his careful control and his desperate love for his broken son and said, I'm not a therapist. I'm a waitress. Lucian's gaze met hers and held it, and in his eyes she saw the weight of centuries, saw loss and hope, and terrible determination. You are the woman who gave him your coat, he said. That is worth more than all the therapists in your world. Maya unpacked her single duffel bag into an antique wardrobe that could have held 10 times her possessions, and the contrast between her threadbare clothing and the luxury surrounding her was almost funny, except it wasn't funny at all. It was terrifying and surreal, and she kept touching the mark on her wrist to remind herself this was real. Through the wall she heard crying, soft and muffled and heartbreaking, and she knocked on the connecting door between their rooms. But there was no answer, so she tried the handle and it opened easily, and Nikolai was curled on the floor by his window, small and alone, and staring at the moon that hung huge and silver in the perpetual twilight outside. Maya didn't speak because what words could touch that kind of grief? Instead, she sat down beside him on the cold floor and wrapped her coat around both of them. The coat that still smelled like diner grease, and burnt coffee and rain, and the normal world she'd left behind. And they sat in silence while Nikolai's breathing gradually slowed and steadied, and then his small hand crept across the space between them and found hers, and held on tight. And in the hallway Lucian stood in shadow and watched them through the open door, and on his ancient face was an expression that might have been hope, or might have been fear, or might have been the terrible vulnerability of a father who had already lost too much and couldn't bear to lose again. Maya woke to weight against her shoulder, and the disorientation of unfamiliar surroundings, her body aching from sleeping on the floor all night. And when she opened her eyes, she saw Nikolai still asleep against her side, his small hand clutching hers, with a grip that even unconsciousness hadn't loosened. His face relaxed in a way it never was when he was awake, and she felt something protective and fierce bloom in her chest that she hadn't expected. A sharp knock at the door made her jump, and a woman entered without waiting for permission, severe and silver-haired with eyes like winter ice, carrying a breakfast tray that held toast and tea for Maya, and a crystal glass filled with something dark and viscous that Maya tried very hard not to examine too closely. I am Isolde, the woman said in clipped tones that suggested she had far better things to do than explain basic survival to humans. Head of household, and you will follow these rules precisely if you wish to survive your contract here. She set the tray down with careful precision and turned to face Maya with an expression that made it clear she found the entire situation distasteful. Rule 1. Do not leave the East Wing after sunset without escort, because the things that walk these halls at night do not all respect the king's claim on you, and I cannot guarantee your safety. Rule 2. Do not enter the West Wing under any circumstances, as those are the king's private chambers, and he does not tolerate intrusion, and his displeasure is not something you want to experience. Rule 3. Do not open windows after dark, because there are things outside that want in, and threshold law becomes dangerously complicated when you invite them yourself. Rule 4. If you hear music playing from nowhere, follow it to the Great Hall immediately, as it is the signal of danger, and your life may depend on your speed. Maya's throat was dry as she asked what happens if I break these rules, and Isolde's smile was sharp as broken glass and twice as cutting. The first rule, you will be hunted and possibly killed. The second, the Vampire King will be displeased in ways that could end very badly for you. The third, you will be taken by whatever is outside, and what takes you will not return you whole or at all. The fourth, you will die because the music means the estate is under attack, and you need to reach safety. Isolde's gaze dropped to the mark on Maya's wrist, the crescent moon wrapped in thorns that still pulsed with faint warmth. That mark means you are bound to him, she said. His enemies are now yours. His battles are now yours, and there are many who would see the Vampire King fall, and they will use any weapon they can find, including you. Maya spent the day trying to communicate with Nikolai after Isolde left, and he woke but refused the dark liquid in the crystal glass. And he wouldn't speak or write, but he drew with obsessive focus, filling page after page with images that made Maya's heart ache. He drew his mother over and over, a woman with dark flowing hair and fierce intelligent eyes, and a crown that looked like it was made from thorns and starlight. And he drew a grand hall filled with people in elaborate formal clothes, and he drew a woman with a knife standing behind his mother. And the red crayon he used for blood was so vivid it looked wet on the page. Through the drawings, Maya pieced together a story that made her stomach turn. Nikolai's mother murdered during what should have been a safe gathering, some kind of peace summit or formal event. And Nikolai had been there, had watched it happen, the trauma stealing his voice and leaving him trapped in silence with his memories. Lucien appeared at noon, moving through the curtained dimness of the estate with that liquid predatory grace that still made Maya's hindbrain scream danger, and he looked at Nikolai's drawings, spread across the floor with an expression that might have been pain if pain could look that carefully controlled and ancient. His mother was Katerina, Lucien said, the Duchess of the Southern Territories. She married me to unite our houses, and for 7 years it worked, and we had peace. Maya asked carefully who killed her, and watched Lucien's expression harden into something that looked carved from stone and ice. A faction that believes humans and vampires should not mix, he said. They called her a traitor for bearing my half-human son. They murdered her to send a message that our bloodlines should remain pure and separate. Maya felt her breath stop in her chest as the implications hit her. Nikolai is half-human, she said, and it wasn't really a question. He is the only hybrid to survive past infancy in 300 years, Lucien explained. That makes him either our future or our greatest threat, depending on who you ask. The Council fears him because they cannot predict what he will become, whether he will possess vampire strength or human weakness, whether he will bridge our kinds or destroy them both. Several days later, Lucien decided Nikolai needed air and announced they were going to the Threshold Market. And Maya followed them into a space that existed between worlds where reality bent in ways that made her head spin. The market materialized from mist and shadow, stalls appearing that sold impossible things, memories captured in crystal bottles that swirled with color and light, fabrics woven from actual moonlight that felt like water and silk combined, food that smelled like every good memory from childhood and made Maya's throat tight with emotions she couldn't name. Nikolai's eyes lit up for the first time since Maya had met him, real genuine wonder replacing the careful blank mask he usually wore. And he tugged her hand toward a stall displaying music boxes in impossible variety, each one more intricate than the last. The vendor was an old woman with fox ears that twitched when she smiled, and she looked at Nikolai with recognition and something that might have been sorrow. "Ah," she said, "the little prince. I remember when his mother brought him here, and they spent hours looking at my wares, and she always let him pick one to take home. She selected a silver music box, carved with roses and thorns, and placed it in Nikolai's small hands. And when he opened it, a lullaby played, and light projected upward, forming a three-dimensional image of Katerina singing. Her voice captured somehow in the mechanism, warm and loving, and heartbreakingly alive. Nikolai clutched the box to his chest as tears streamed down his face, and Maya felt her own eyes burn watching him grieve so openly for the first time. Movement caught her attention across the market. A hooded figure watching them with an intensity that made her skin prickle, and Lucian noticed at the same moment, his body going rigid as he stepped in front of Maya and Nikolai with protective instinct. "We are leaving," Lucian said with no room for argument now, and they moved quickly back through the market toward the car, while Maya tried to keep Nikolai moving without frightening him more. As they reached the vehicle, Nikolai grabbed Maya's hand and squeezed hard, a silent, desperate plea for safety, and Maya squeezed back, promising with the pressure that she would protect him, even though she had no idea how. That night, Maya woke to scratching at her window, a sound like nails dragging across glass that made every hair on her body stand up. And she remembered Isolde's rule about not opening windows after dark, and stayed very still trying to decide if she was imagining it. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, and a voice called through the glass, sweet and childlike but wrong, in a way that made Maya's stomach clench with primal fear. "Let me in," it crooned. "Let me in. I'm so cold and alone out here, and I just want to come inside where it's warm." Nikolai appeared in her doorway, clutching his music box, his face white with terror, and Maya pulled him into her room and locked the connecting door and tried to think past the panic singing in her veins. The window cracked with a sound like ice breaking, and claws pressed against the glass from outside, long and curved and distinctly inhuman, and the voice laughed with malicious delight. "The king's little pet human," it said. "So brave standing there with your fireplace poker, so breakable, I can smell your fear and it smells absolutely delicious." Maya had grabbed the poker without conscious thought, and now she stood between Nikolai and the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. And she had no idea what she could do against something that could break glass with its bare hands, but she knew she would die before letting it touch Nikolai. Lucien's voice cut through the night from outside, cold with a fury that made the temperature in the room drop. "You trespass on claimed ground," he said, and the sound of the fight that followed was horrible. Snarls and breaking bone, and a scream that cut off wet and sudden into silence. Maya stood frozen, still gripping the poker, until Lucian appeared at her door somehow inside without her hearing him enter, blood on his hands and splattered across his shirt, and his eyes still glowing red with an inner light that should have been impossible. "Are you harmed?" he asked, and his voice was softer now, but still carrying that edge of lethal violence barely contained. Maya shook her head and managed to ask what was that thing, and Lucien's expression was grim as death. "A revenant," he said, "sent to test our defenses. They know Nikolai is here now, and they will come again, and next time they will come in greater numbers with better planning." Lucien insisted Maya learn to defend herself after the attack, and he assigned Isolde to teach her threshold law and vampire etiquette, and Isolde proved merciless in her instruction, drilling Maya on rules and customs until her head spun. "You are bound to the king," Isolde said during one particularly brutal lesson. "That makes you a target for every vampire lord who wants his power. They will try to use you as leverage or kill you to weaken him, or turn you against him if they possibly can." Maya learned that vampires could not enter a home without invitation, but threshold law was vastly more complex than simple folklore suggested. Learned that once you invited someone across your threshold, they gained certain rights within your space that could not easily be revoked. Learned that breaking a blood contract brought blood debt that was enforceable by death, and that the Vampire Council met every new moon to discuss politics and power, and that Lucian's position on the council was precarious because Nikolai was hybrid, and many saw him as abomination rather than heir. Meanwhile, Lucien took Nikolai to the training courtyard each afternoon, and Maya watched from her window as he taught the boy basic self-defense with surprising patience, adjusting Nikolai's small body into proper stances with gentle hands, praising small victories with genuine warmth. And it was the first time Maya had seen Lucien really smile. Not the careful political expression he wore like armor, but something real and unguarded that transformed his ancient face into something almost human, and she felt something shift in her chest, some wall beginning to crack that she'd built around her heart years ago. Days settled into rhythm as Maya and Nikolai built their routine. Mornings spent having breakfast together while Nikolai drew, and Maya read to him from books she found in the library, afternoons walking the estate gardens under the watchful eyes of vampire guards, evenings spent with the music box playing Katerina's lullaby over and over because Nikolai requested it through gestures every single night, and nights when Maya slept with her door unlocked, so Nikolai could come in when nightmares woke him screaming silently, and he always did. Nikolai began to trust her in small, incremental ways that made her heart ache, holding her hand unprompted when they walked, sitting in her lap during story time with his head tucked under her chin, falling asleep with his head on her shoulder during a thunderstorm while she sang softly and stroked his hair. Maya realized with dawning horror that she wasn't just his companion anymore, she was becoming his mother figure, filling the void that Katerina's death had left, and this terrified her because what would happen when the year ended and her contract was fulfilled and she had to leave him? A raven arrived one morning with a scroll sealed in black wax, and Lucian read it with an expression that grew darker with each line. "The council has summoned Nikolai," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "They want to assess whether he is fit to be my heir." Maya stared at him in disbelief. "He's 7 years old," she said, and Lucien crushed the scroll in his fist. "He is the only hybrid," Lucien replied. "They fear what he could become. They will look for any weakness, any excuse to declare him unfit and remove him from the line of succession." Maya's blood ran cold as she processed what remove meant. "You mean kill him?" she said, and Lucien's smile was terrible. "I mean erase him from existence," he said. "No body, no memory, no record that he ever lived, as if he never was." He began to pace with predatory restlessness. "I have 3 weeks to prepare him," he said. "He must demonstrate control, intelligence, strength, everything the council values." Maya felt anger rise hot in her throat. "He's a traumatized child who just watched his mother die," she said, and Lucian's eyes met hers with ancient determination. "Then we teach him to weaponize his trauma," he said. "You will come with us to the council meeting. As his companion, you are permitted to attend." Maya worked intensely with Nikolai over the following days to help him communicate, teaching him basic sign language, and he picked it up with frightening speed, his hybrid intelligence processing and retaining information faster than any human child could. The first breakthrough came when Nikolai signed "thank you" after Maya finished reading him a story, his small hands forming the symbols with careful precision, and Maya felt tears spill down her cheeks while Lucian watched from the doorway and looked away as if her emotion made him uncomfortable. The second breakthrough was both better and worse, Nikolai signing mother while looking directly at Maya, and she froze, not knowing how to respond because she wasn't his mother, couldn't be his mother. Her contract ended in 11 months, and then what? Lucian spoke quietly from where he stood. "If he has chosen you," he said, "do not reject him. He has already lost one mother and cannot survive losing another. Maya looked at Nikolai's hopeful, frightened face and made a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'm here," she said, and signed simultaneously. "I'm not going anywhere." 2 weeks before the council meeting, Lucian broke his own rule and invited Maya into the West Wing, leading her to his private study where a portrait dominated one wall, Katerina in her full glory, breathtaking and fierce with a crown of silver thorns and eyes that seemed to follow Maya around the room. "She was murdered because she defied the council," Lucian said. "She wanted peace between humans and vampires. She believed we could coexist and thrive together. They saw it as dilution of our bloodline and killed her for it." Maya studied the portrait and said carefully, "You loved her," and Lucian was silent for a long moment. "I respected her," he finally said. "Love is a dangerous indulgence for my kind. It makes us weak, makes us vulnerable, makes us human." He pulled out a locked box and opened it to reveal a silver dagger with a ruby hilt, the blade gleaming with its own inner light. "This is the blade that killed her," he said. "I took it from her murderer's corpse after I tore him apart. It is vampire forged, and one of the only things that can truly kill one of us. One cut, and even the oldest of us falls." Maya stared at the weapon, not understanding why he was showing her this. "Because if the council tries to take Nikolai," Lucienne said, "I will slaughter every one of them. And I need you to take Nikolai and run as far and fast as you can." He placed the dagger in her hands, and it was heavier than she expected, warm as if alive. "This will protect you," he said, but Maya shook her head. "You're asking me to abandon you," she said, and Lucienne's expression was bleak. "I'm asking you to save my son," he replied. That night, Nikolai had his worst nightmare yet, screaming without sound and clawing at his throat as if trying to tear out the silence, and Maya held him and sang the lullaby from the music box until his thrashing slowed and his breathing steadied. Lucien appeared in the doorway and watched them for a long moment before walking in and sitting on the other side of the bed, and for one fragile moment they were a family, Maya and Lucien flanking Nikolai, who slept between them finally peaceful, and Maya felt something dangerous and warm bloom in her chest. Then Lucien stood and the moment shattered. "The council meets in 12 days, he said. "We leave in 10, and he walked out, leaving Maya alone with Nikolai and the music box still playing its endless lullaby. The next morning, an envelope was delivered to the estate gates, addressed to the king's human in elegant script. And when Maya opened it, her hand started shaking so badly she almost dropped it, because inside was a photograph of Marcus, her brother, circled in red ink with 2 words written underneath in the same red: "Leverage acquired." And Maya understood with sick certainty that her enemies now knew exactly how to hurt her, and they would use Marcus to control her, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. Maya received the envelope during breakfast, and her hands shook so badly she dropped her coffee, the ceramic mug shattering against the floor and spreading dark liquid across the marble like blood. And when she opened the envelope and saw the photograph inside, her entire world tilted sideways. Marcus stood outside his physical therapy clinic in Oklahoma, caught mid-step on the sidewalk, unaware he was being watched, and the timestamp in the corner read, "Yesterday, 3:47 in the afternoon," which meant this was recent, meant whoever took this photo had been close enough to touch him. A note was tucked behind the photograph, elegant script on cream paper that made her stomach turn. "The council is interested in ensuring your testimony at the hearing remains favorable," it read. "Your brother is under our protection. How unfortunate if that protection were withdrawn." Maya's terror was a living thing clawing up her throat because she hadn't spoken to Marcus in 2 weeks. Blackthorn Estate had no phones except the one in Lucien's study, and letters were screened by Isolde before being sent. And she'd written him twice saying she was fine, working a private job, would call soon, all lies that felt thinner with each repetition. She stood so fast her chair fell backward, and Nikolai looked up from his drawing with wide, frightened eyes, but Maya was already moving, storming through corridors toward Lucien's study without knocking, or caring about protocol, or the rules she'd been taught. They have my brother, she said without preamble, slamming the photograph onto his desk, and Lucian looked up from papers he'd been reading, his expression shifting from surprise to cold fury as he examined the image. This is Counselor Theron's work, Lucian said, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. He wants Nikolai declared unfit, and you are leveraged to make me withdraw my claim. Then withdraw it, Maya said, her voice breaking. I don't care about vampire politics. I don't care about councils or thrones or any of this. I care about my brother, and if something happens to him because of me, I will never forgive you. Lucien's expression hardened into something ancient and implacable. If I withdraw, he said carefully, Nikolai dies within the week. Hybrid children have no legal protection without a recognized parent. The council will declare him a threat and erase him from existence. So what? Maya demanded, her hands clenched into fists. Marcus dies instead. Is that the choice you're giving me? Pick which person I love gets to live. No one is dying, Lucian said, and reached for an antique rotary phone on his desk, speaking rapid Romanian into the receiver with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. He hung up and looked at Maya with something that might have been sympathy, if sympathy could look that deadly. I'm sending my best tracker to Oklahoma, he said. If your brother is still alive, we will find him and confirm his location. If, Maya repeated, the word hollow in her mouth, and Lucian's silence was answer enough, was admission that Marcus might already be dead, might already be payment for her defiance or her kindness or her stupid decision to sign a contract in blood. Nikolai found Maya in the garden an hour later where she'd gone to cry in private, thinking she was alone among the roses that bloomed in impossible colors, but he appeared silently and climbed into her lap without asking, signing with small, careful hands, sad. Maya tried to smile, tried to be strong for him because that was her job, her purpose here. I'm okay, sweetheart, she said, but Nikolai shook his head and signed again more insistently, truth. Maya was stunned because when had he learned that sign? She didn't remember teaching him that specific word, and his eyes were so earnest and knowing that she couldn't lie to him. I'm scared, she admitted. Someone I love is in danger, and I don't know how to help them. Nikolai thought for a moment, his small face serious beyond his years, then signed slowly, Father will fix. The simple, absolute trust in his expression broke something in Maya's chest because he believed it completely, believed Lucian could solve anything, fix anything, save anyone. Your father is trying, Maya said gently, but sometimes even kings can't fix everything. Sometimes bad things happen no matter how powerful you are. Nikolai pulled back and looked at her with those ancient eyes, then signed with deliberate precision. You are scared for brother. I am scared for you. Same. Maya realized with dawning comprehension that Nikolai saw her as family now, completely and irrevocably, saw her fear for Marcus as equivalent to his fear for her, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing and beautiful and more than she knew how to carry. That evening, Lucian summoned Maya to a chamber she hadn't known existed, hidden behind a bookshelf in the library that swung open to reveal a war room with maps covering the walls, red pins marking locations across continents, lines drawn between them in what looked like blood. We're going to the council meeting early, Lucian announced without preamble, in 5 days instead of 10. Why? Maya asked, still raw from crying, still terrified for Marcus, and Lucian gestured to the maps. Because Theron expects us to scramble, to panic, to arrive desperate and unprepared. We'll arrive composed and confident with Nikolai ready to prove himself. It strips his leverage. And Marcus, Maya demanded. What about my brother? And Lucian slid a folder across the table, surveillance photographs spilling out showing a compound in New Mexico, heavily guarded by figures that moved with inhuman grace. My tracker found him, Lucian said. He's alive. Held in a safe house outside Albuquerque. Theron won't kill him before the hearing because he's only valuable as a threat. Dead, he's useless. So we wait. Maya said, feeling sick. We just leave him there. No, Lucien replied, his smile sharp and dangerous. We negotiate. I'm going to offer Theron something he wants more than your brother. Lucien called an emergency council session that night, using a mirror that showed other vampires' faces, their images flickering like candle flames. And when Theron appeared, Maya felt her skin crawl because he was ancient and skeletal, his face like parchment stretched over bone, dripping with old-world menace and casual cruelty. You have a human under unlawful detention, Lucien said without greeting or preamble. Release him or I bring formal charges before the full council. Theron's laugh was like wind through a crypt. You're in no position to make demands, Draculesht, he said. Your half-breed son is an abomination. The human woman is a distraction. I'm doing you a favor by showing you how weak you've become. I'm offering you the Bordeaux vineyards, Lucien said. And every vampire in the mirror call went utterly still, silence falling like a guillotine blade. The Bordeaux vineyards were legendary, even Maya knew that from Isolde's lessons. Vampire-owned wineries that produced blood wine worth fortunes, controlled by Lucien's family for centuries. You'd trade a century of income for one human, Theron said, disbelief coloring his voice, and Lucien's expression was carved from ice. I'd trade anything for leverage over you, he replied, except, and Marcus Chen goes free tonight. Refuse, and I go public with your illegal detainment. You'll be censured, possibly exiled, and either way you lose face before the council. Theron's eyes narrowed with calculation. The vineyards, he said slowly, and you withdraw Nikolai's claim to your throne. Maya's heart stopped, the world narrowing to that single moment, and she waited for Lucien to agree, to trade Nikolai's future for Marcus's life, and she didn't know which choice she wanted him to make. No, Lucien said flatly, and Theron smiled. Then we have no deal, he replied, and started to fade from the mirror, but Lucien leaned forward with predatory focus. Then I'll burn the vineyards myself and blame you, he said. Either way, you lose. Either you get them legitimately, or you get blamed for their destruction and face the council's wrath, your choice. A tense beat of silence stretched while Maya forgot to breathe, and then Theron's smile turned vicious. The vineyards for the human, he said, but the boy still faces assessment. If he fails, he's ours to deal with as we see fit. Agreed, Lucien said, and the mirror went dark. That night, Maya got a call, Lucien allowing it but standing in the doorway to monitor. And when she heard Marcus's voice, she started crying so hard she could barely speak. Maya, he said, his voice shaky but blessedly alive. What the hell is going on? These people just let me go, said it was a mistake, said I was free to leave. Are you okay? Maya managed through tears. Did they hurt you? Are you safe? I'm fine, Marcus replied. Just freaked out. Where are you? Why haven't you called? What kind of job doesn't let you use a phone? She couldn't tell him the truth. Couldn't explain vampires and blood contracts and the impossible choice she'd made. I'm working a private job, she said, out of state. I'm safe, I promise, but I need you to do something for me. These people knew things about you, Maya, Marcus said, his voice rising with fear. Knew things about us, our address, my physical therapy schedule. What the hell did you get involved in? Marcus, listen, Maya interrupted. Stay with Aunt Gloria for a few weeks. Don't go home. Please just trust me. You're scaring me, he said, and Maya closed her eyes. I know, she whispered. I'm sorry. I'll explain everything soon. I love you. She hung up before he could argue, before her resolve could crack, and turned to find Lucien still watching from the doorway. He's safe, Lucien said, for now. Maya rounded on him with all the emotion she'd been holding back. You just traded a fortune for my brother, she said. Why would you do that? What does it gain you? Lucien looked at her for a long moment with an expression she couldn't read. Because Nikolai needs you whole, he said finally, not shattered by grief, not broken by guilt. That's not an answer, Maya said, and Lucien's smile was tired. "It's the only answer you're getting tonight," he replied, and left her standing there trying to understand what had just happened. Later, unable to sleep, Maya wandered the estate and found Lucien in the music room, playing a piano that sounded like midnight and starlight combined, and she sat beside him on the bench without asking permission. They didn't speak for a long time, Lucien's hands moving over the keys with practiced grace, and Maya let the music wash over her. Let it soothe the ragged edges of her fear. "Why do you even want Nikolai to be your heir?" she asked eventually. "You could name someone else, avoid all this conflict and danger." Lucien's hands stilled on the keys, and he was quiet so long Maya thought he wouldn't answer. "Because he's my son," he said finally, "and because Katerina died believing he could be the bridge between our worlds, believing he represented something new and necessary, I won't let her death be meaningless." "You did love her," Maya said softly, and Lucian's expression was distant. "I love what she represented," he said. "Hope, change, the possibility that we could be more than monsters. I love what she left behind, Nikolai, a chance to be something other than what I was made to be." Maya felt the air shift between them, felt something dangerous and electric spark in the space they shared, and she stood abruptly before she could do something stupid. "I should go," she said, and Lucian caught her wrist gently. "Maya," he said, her first name instead of Miss Chen, and the intimacy of it made her breath catch. "Thank you for staying, for caring for him when you didn't have to." "I signed a contract," Maya said, trying to maintain distance, trying to keep this professional. "You signed a contract," Lucian agreed. "But you love him anyway. That's not obligation. That's choice. That's something no contract could compel." Maya left before she could respond, before she could examine the way her heart was pounding or the warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude. Nikolai watched from the stairs where he'd been sitting unseen, and he signed to himself with small, satisfied movements. Father, Maya, family, the three words that meant everything to him, the three concepts that were becoming inseparable in his mind. In the council chamber 5 days away, ancient vampires gathered and sharpened their arguments like knives, preparing to test Nikolai, preparing to find him wanting, preparing to destroy Lucian through his son. In his study, Theron burned the contract for the Bordeaux vineyards and smiled to himself, a predator's smile full of teeth and cruel satisfaction. "Let them come," he said to the empty room. "The boy will fail because he must fail, and when he does, I'll have the vineyards through legal claim, I'll have Lucien's throne through council vote, and I'll have the leverage to destroy Draculeshti forever. Everything I want, delivered by his own desperate choices." Maya received the envelope during breakfast, and her hands shook so badly she dropped her coffee, the ceramic mug shattering against the floor and spreading dark liquid across the marble like blood. And when she opened the envelope and saw the photograph inside, her entire world tilted sideways. Marcus stood outside his physical therapy clinic in Oklahoma, caught mid-step on the sidewalk, unaware he was being watched. And the timestamp in the corner read yesterday 3:47 in the afternoon, which meant this was recent, meant whoever took this photo had been close enough to touch him. A note was tucked behind the photograph, elegant script on cream paper that made her stomach turn. "The council is interested in ensuring your testimony at the hearing remains favorable," it read. "Your brother is under our protection." How unfortunate if that protection were withdrawn. Maya's terror was a living thing clawing up her throat because she hadn't spoken to Marcus in 2 weeks. Blackthorn Estate had no phones except the one in Lucian's study, and letters were screened by Isolde before being sent, and she'd written him twice saying she was fine, working a private job, would call soon, all lies that felt thinner with each repetition. She stood so fast her chair fell backward, and Nikolai looked up from his drawing with wide, frightened eyes. But Maya was already moving, storming through corridors toward Lucian's study without knocking or caring about protocol or the rules she'd been taught. "They have my brother," she said without preamble, slamming the photograph onto his desk, and Lucian looked up from papers he'd been reading, his expression shifting from surprise to cold fury as he examined the image. "This is Counselor Theron's work," Lucian said, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. "He wants Nikolai declared unfit, and you are leveraged to make me withdraw my claim." "Then withdraw it," Maya said, her voice breaking. "I don't care about vampire politics. I don't care about councils or thrones or any of this. I care about my brother, and if something happens to him because of me, I will never forgive you." Lucien's expression hardened into something ancient and implacable. "If I withdraw," he said carefully, "Nikolai dies within the week. Hybrid children have no legal protection without a recognized parent. The council will declare him a threat and erase him from existence." "So what?" Maya demanded, her hands clenched into fists. "Marcus dies instead." "Is that the choice you're giving me? Pick which person I love gets to live." "No one is dying," Lucien said, and reached for an antique rotary phone on his desk, speaking rapid Romanian into the receiver with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. He hung up and looked at Maya with something that might have been sympathy if sympathy could look that deadly. "I'm sending my best tracker to Oklahoma," he said. "If your brother is still alive, we will find him and confirm his location." "If," Maya repeated, the word hollow in her mouth, and Lucian's silence was answer enough. Was admission that Marcus might already be dead, might already be payment for her defiance or her kindness, or her stupid decision to sign a contract in blood. Nikolai found Maya in the garden an hour later, where she'd gone to cry in private, thinking she was alone among the roses that bloomed in impossible colors, but he appeared silently and climbed into her lap without asking, signing with small, careful hands, sad. Maya tried to smile, tried to be strong for him because that was her job, her purpose here. "I'm okay, sweetheart," she said. But Nikolai shook his head and signed again more insistently, "Truth." Maya was stunned because when had he learned that sign? She didn't remember teaching him that specific word, and his eyes were so earnest and knowing that she couldn't lie to him. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Someone I love is in danger, and I don't know how to help them." Nikolai thought for a moment, his small face serious beyond his years, then signed slowly, "Father will fix." The simple, absolute trust in his expression broke something in Maya's chest, because he believed it completely, believed Lucian could solve anything, fix anything, save anyone. "Your father is trying," Maya said gently. "But sometimes even kings can't fix everything. Sometimes bad things happen, no matter how powerful you are." Nikolai pulled back and looked at her with those ancient eyes, then signed with deliberate precision, "You are scared for brother. I am scared for you. Same." Maya realized with dawning comprehension that Nikolai saw her as family now, completely and irrevocably, saw her fear for Marcus as equivalent to his fear for her, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing and beautiful and more than she knew how to carry. That evening, Lucian summoned Maya to a chamber she hadn't known existed, hidden behind a bookshelf in the library that swung open to reveal a war room with maps covering the walls, red pins marking locations across continents, lines drawn between them in what looked like blood. "We're going to the council meeting early," Lucian announced without preamble. "In 5 days instead of 10. "Why?" Maya asked, still raw from crying, still terrified for Marcus, and Lucian gestured to the maps. "Because Theron expects us to scramble, to panic, to arrive desperate and unprepared. We'll arrive composed and confident with Nikolai ready to prove himself. It strips his leverage." "And Marcus," Maya demanded. "What about my brother?" And Lucien slid a folder across the table, surveillance photographs spilling out showing a compound in New Mexico, heavily guarded by figures that moved with inhuman grace. "My tracker found him," Lucian said. "He's alive, held in a safe house outside Albuquerque. Theron won't kill him before the hearing because he's only valuable as a threat. Dead, he's useless." "So we wait," Maya said, feeling sick. "We just leave him there." "No," Lucian replied, his smile sharp and dangerous. "We negotiate. I'm going to offer Theron something he wants more than your brother. Lucian called an emergency council session that night, using a mirror that showed other vampires' faces, their images flickering like candle flames. And when Theron appeared, Maya felt her skin crawl because he was ancient and skeletal, his face like parchment stretched over bone, dripping with old-world menace and casual cruelty. You have a human under unlawful detention, Lucian said without greeting or preamble. Release him, or I bring formal charges before the full council. Theron's laugh was like wind through a crypt. You're in no position to make demands, Draculesht, he said. Your half-breed son is an abomination. The human woman is a distraction. I'm doing you a favor by showing you how weak you've become. I'm offering you the Bordeaux vineyards, Lucian said, and every vampire in the mirror call went utterly still, silence falling like a guillotine blade. The Bordeaux vineyards were legendary, even Maya knew that from Isolde's lessons, vampire-owned wineries that produced blood wine worth fortunes, controlled by Lucian's family for centuries. You'd trade a century of income for one human, Theron said, disbelief coloring his voice, and Lucian's expression was carved from ice. I'd trade anything for leverage over you, he replied. Accept and Marcus Chen goes free tonight. Refuse and I go public with your illegal detainment. You'll be censured, possibly exiled, and either way, you lose face before the council. Theron's eyes narrowed with calculation. The vineyards, he said slowly, and you withdraw Nicolay's claim to your throne. Maya's heart stopped, the world narrowing to that single moment, and she waited for Lucian to agree, to trade Nicolay's future for Marcus's life, and she didn't know which choice she wanted him to make. No, Lucian said flatly, and Theron smiled. Then we have no deal, he replied, and started to fade from the mirror, but Lucian leaned forward with predatory focus. Then I'll burn the vineyards myself and blame you, he said. Either way you lose. Either you get them legitimately, or you get blamed for their destruction and face the council's wrath. Your choice. A tense beat of silence stretched while Maya forgot to breathe, and then Theron's smile turned vicious. The vineyard's for the human, he said, but the boy still faces assessment. If he fails, he's ours to deal with as we see fit. Agreed, Lucian said, and the mirror went dark. That night Maya got a call, Lucian allowing it but standing in the doorway to monitor. And when she heard Marcus's voice, she started crying so hard she could barely speak. Maya, he said, his voice shaky but blessedly alive. What the hell is going on? These people just let me go. Said it was a mistake. Said I was free to leave. Are you okay? Maya managed through tears. Did they hurt you? Are you safe? I'm fine, Marcus replied. Just freaked out? Where are you? Why haven't you called? What kind of job doesn't let you use a phone? She couldn't tell him the truth. Couldn't explain vampires and blood contracts and the impossible choice she'd made. I'm working a private job, she said, out of state. I'm safe, I promise, but I need you to do something for me. These people knew things about you, Maya, Marcus said, his voice rising with fear. Knew things about us, our address, my physical therapy schedule. What the hell did you get involved in? Marcus, listen, Maya interrupted. Stay with Aunt Gloria for a few weeks. Don't go home. Please just trust me. You're scaring me, he said, and Maya closed her eyes. I know, she whispered. I'm sorry. I'll explain everything soon. I love you. She hung up before he could argue, before her resolve could crack, and turned to find Lucian still watching from the doorway. He's safe, Lucian said, for now. Maya rounded on him with all the emotion she'd been holding back. You just traded a fortune for my brother, she said. Why would you do that? What does it gain you? Lucien looked at her for a long moment with an expression she couldn't read. Because Nikolai needs you whole, he said finally, not shattered by grief, not broken by guilt. That's not an answer, Maya said, and Lucien's smile was tired. It's the only answer you're getting tonight, he replied, and left her standing there trying to understand what had just happened. Later, unable to sleep, Maya wandered the estate and found Lucien in the music room, playing a piano that sounded like midnight and starlight combined, and she sat beside him on the bench without asking permission. They didn't speak for a long time, Lucien's hands moving over the keys with practiced grace, and Maya let the music wash over her, let it soothe the ragged edges of her fear. "Why do you even want Nikolai to be your heir?" she asked eventually. "You could name someone else, avoid all this conflict and danger." Lucien's hands stilled on the keys, and he was quiet so long Maya thought he wouldn't answer. "Because he's my son," he said finally. "And because Katerina died believing he could be the bridge between our worlds, believing he represented something new and necessary, I won't let her death be meaningless." "You did love her," Maya said softly, and Lucian's expression was distant. "I love what she represented," he said. "Hope, change, the possibility that we could be more than monsters. I love what she left behind, Nikolai, a chance to be something other than what I was made to be." Maya felt the air shift between them, felt something dangerous and electric spark in the space they shared. And she stood abruptly before she could do something stupid. "I should go," she said, and Lucien caught her wrist gently. "Maya," he said, her first name instead of Miss Chen, and the intimacy of it made her breath catch. "Thank you for staying, for caring for him when you didn't have to." "I signed a contract," Maya said, trying to maintain distance, trying to keep this professional. "You signed a contract," Lucien agreed, "but you love him anyway. That's not obligation. That's choice. That's something no contract could compel." Maya left before she could respond, before she could examine the way her heart was pounding, or the warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude. Nikolai watched from the stairs where he'd been sitting unseen, and he signed to himself with small, satisfied movements. Father, Maya, family. The three words that meant everything to him, the three concepts that were becoming inseparable in his mind. In the council chamber 5 days away, ancient vampires gathered and sharpened their arguments like knives, preparing to test Nikolai, preparing to find him wanting, preparing to destroy Lucien through his son. In his study, Theron burned the contract for the Bordeaux vineyards and smiled to himself, a predator's smile full of teeth and cruel satisfaction. "Let them come," he said to the empty room. "The boy will fail because he must fail, and when he does, I'll have the vineyards through legal claim, I'll have Lucian's throne through council vote, and I'll have the leverage to destroy Draculeshti forever. Everything I want delivered by his own desperate choices." The morning after the inquiry, Maya woke to find Nikolai standing at her bedroom door, his small silhouette backlit by corridor torchlight, and when she sat up, he signed with unusual urgency, "Something is wrong. The house feels different." Maya dressed quickly and followed him through silent hallways to the main entrance where Isolde stood reading a parchment sealed with black wax, her face grave and pale. And when she saw Maya, she said without preamble, "Cassandra has summoned us back to the council chamber. Emergency session. Theron has filed new charges." Lucien appeared from his study already dressed in formal black, his expression carved from ice, and he took the parchment from Isolde and read it in silence, then crushed it in his fist and said through clenched teeth, "He's accusing Maya of criminal deception, claiming she deliberately concealed her past to infiltrate vampire society, claiming she poses a security threat." Maya felt the floor tilt beneath her, felt the brief victory of yesterday crumble into ash, and Nikolai grabbed her hand and squeezed with surprising strength as though he could anchor her to the present through sheer force of will. They took the shadow roads again, the journey feeling endless despite its brevity, and emerged in the Vienna council chamber where twice as many vampires had gathered, their faces ranging from curious to hostile, and Theron stood at the center looking smug and vindicated. Cassandra called the session to order, her blind eyes somehow finding Maya in the crowd, and she said with careful neutrality, "Councillor Theron has presented evidence that Miss Chen deliberately concealed criminal history when entering into her contract with Lord Draculeshti. Evidence that includes documentation of theft, fraud, and deception spanning multiple years. Miss Chen, you are called to answer these charges." Maya stepped forward, her legs shaking but her voice steady, and the evidence was presented piece by piece. Pharmacy logs showing medications missing on days she worked, falsified prescription forms in her handwriting, witness statements from colleagues who remembered her desperation, her mother's deteriorating condition, the choices she made when no legal options remained. Theron stood like a prosecutor delivering a death sentence and said with cold satisfaction, "The law is explicit. Companions to royal heirs must be of unblemished character, must be trustworthy beyond question. This woman is a proven criminal who has spent years deceiving everyone around her. Her contract must be voided immediately." Lucien moved to Maya's side, his presence a wall of protective fury, and he said with dangerous calm, "These are human matters from a decade ago." She was barely an adult facing an impossible situation. She has served Nikolai faithfully and with genuine care. Past mistakes do not erase present character. Cassandra tilted her head in that unsettling way she had, and said, "The law is indeed clear, Lord Draculeshti. Companions must be of unblemished character because they have intimate access to royal heirs. They shape young minds and influence future rulers. If the charges are true, her contract is void regardless of current behavior or past circumstances." Maya felt something snap inside her, felt the weight of lies and secrets and careful omissions become unbearable, and she stepped away from Lucian and faced the council directly and said in a voice that carried through the chamber, "They are true, all of it. I stole medications because my mother was dying of cancer and could not afford pain management. The insurance company denied her claims. Doctors would not prescribe adequate relief because they feared liability. So I took what she needed from the pharmacy where I worked. I falsified prescriptions. I broke laws. I did it knowingly and deliberately." The chamber went absolutely silent, every vampire frozen in place, and Maya continued. "I was 20 years old watching my mother scream in agony every night, watching her beg for death because the pain was unbearable, watching her waste away while bureaucrats and lawyers debated coverage. So yes, I stole, yes, I lied, yes, I committed crimes, and I am not proud of it, but I would do it again in a heartbeat, because 3 weeks of relief before she died was worth any consequence." Theron's smile was vicious and triumphant. "A touching story," he said, "utterly irrelevant. The law demands integrity, and you have admitted to having none. You have admitted to being exactly what I accused you of being, a criminal and a liar." Nikolai suddenly stood on his chair, his small body vibrating with rage Maya had never seen in him, and his hands moved so fast they blurred, signing with a fury that made several vampires step back instinctively, and Maya found herself translating without conscious thought. "He says you want unblemished. He says none of you are unblemished. You have all killed, you have all stolen, you have lived centuries stained with blood and cruelty. Maya stole medicine to save a life. You steal lives for pleasure and sport. You drain humans and discard them. You manipulate and destroy. Who is the real criminal? Who lacks integrity? The woman who broke laws out of love, or the monsters who break lives out of habit?" Shocked silence crashed over the chamber like a wave, vampires staring at the small hybrid boy who had just called them all monsters with perfect accuracy, and Cassandra's expression shifted into something that might have been respect or amusement or both. "The boy makes a compelling point," she said, her voice carrying unprecedented warmth. "We who have lived centuries and committed atrocities beyond counting sit in judgment of a woman who stole painkillers for her dying mother. The irony is almost poetic." Theron sputtered, his composure cracking. "He is a child swayed by sentiment. He does not understand law or precedent or the necessity of standards." "He is a prince speaking truth," Cassandra said, her voice sharp now. "And truth has value even when inconvenient. Especially when inconvenient. I propose a counter-judgment. Miss Chen's actions, though illegal, were driven by mercy and compassion. Mercy is a rare commodity in our world. Perhaps we should value it rather than condemn it. I vote to uphold her contract." The vote proceeded in tense silence, hands rising one by one, and Maya counted with her heart in her throat, 6 in favor, 5 against, passing by the narrowest possible margin, and Theron's fury was palpable, a living thing that filled the chamber with ozone and threat. As the council wills, he said through gritted teeth, bowing stiffly, but as they prepared to leave, he moved close to Lucienne and whispered just loud enough for Maya to hear. This is not over, Draculeshti. You have made powerful enemies today. You and your human and your mongrel son. That night Maya could not sleep, anxiety and relief and delayed terror churning in her stomach, and she walked the mountain corridors trying to calm her racing thoughts, trying to process everything that had happened. The attack came without warning, 3 figures materializing from shadows with supernatural silence, and Maya barely had time to register masked vampires before they were on her, moving with inhuman speed. She fought with the dagger Lucienne had given her, managed to slash one attacker's arm, but she was hopelessly outmatched. And fangs sank into her shoulder with burning agony that made her scream. Lucian appeared in an explosion of violence, moving so fast he seemed to teleport, and he tore into the assassins with savage efficiency, literally ripping them apart, limbs separated from bodies, blood painting the stone walls in abstract patterns. He carried Maya back to their chambers, her blood soaking through her shirt, and Nikolai woke at their entrance, saw the crimson spreading across fabric, and went absolutely silent with terror, his eyes huge and traumatized. Lucien's hands shook as he treated her wound, his usual control shattered by fear and rage, and he said without looking at her, I should have known. Theron does not accept defeat gracefully. He plays long games and uses proxies. This is my fault. Nikolai, Maya whispered, her voice weak from blood loss and shock. Is he okay? And Lucien glanced at his son who stood frozen in the corner, and he said quietly, He is terrified. He thinks you are dying. I am not dying from one bite, right? Maya said, trying to sound confident, trying to calm Nikolai with her voice, and Lucien hesitated in a way that made her stomach drop. The venom is in your system, he said. In humans it causes one of 3 things: death, turning, or thralling. Thralling, Maya repeated, the word foreign and ominous, and Lucien met her eyes finally. You become bound to the vampire who bit you, mind and body and will enslaved. You become their puppet, their property, utterly unable to resist their commands. Maya's horror was absolute and suffocating. So I am going to become Theron's puppet, she said, going to be used against you and Nikolai. And Lucien shook his head. Not if I can stop it, and he bit his own wrist, dark blood welling immediately, and offered it to her. My blood will counteract the venom, but it will also bind you to me instead. What does that mean? Maya asked, staring at the bleeding wrist, and Lucien's expression was tortured. It means you will feel what I feel, know when I am near, crave my presence. It is a different kind of prison, Maya. I will not force this on you, but without it, you will be Theron's thrall by morning. Maya looked at Nikolai trembling in the corner, looked at Lucien's anguished face, looked at the bite wound on her shoulder, already turning black with spreading venom, and she reached for his wrist and drank. The effect was immediate and overwhelming, fire racing through her veins, the world sharpening into impossible clarity. Colors brighter, and sounds louder, and most overwhelming. Lucien's emotions flooding into her consciousness, his fear for her, his rage at Theron, his desperate protective love for both her and Nikolai crashing over her in waves. When it faded enough for her to breathe, she gasped, I feel you, in my head, in my chest, everywhere. And Lucien nodded, his eyes searching hers. And I feel you. This is forever, Maya. We are bound now in ways that cannot be undone. Then we are in this forever, Maya said, reaching for his hand, and Lucien pulled her close with careful intensity, mindful of her injury, but unable to maintain distance. Nikolai had stopped signing, stopped moving, and he sat in the corner staring at nothing with the same 1,000-yard stare he had worn for months after Katerina's death. And Maya's heart broke seeing him retreat into that unreachable place. She tried to reach him, crawling across the floor because standing made her dizzy, and she signed in his line of sight. "Sweetheart, I am okay. See? I am right here. I am not leaving." But Nikolai did not respond, did not even blink, and his hands lay limp in his lap. Lucien knelt beside them, his face etched with pain. He is shutting down like he did after Katerina died. He is protecting himself from more loss by refusing to feel anything, and Maya's desperation clawed at her throat. What do we do? How do we bring him back? "We end this," Lucian said, his voice hardening into something ancient and implacable. "Tonight, we end Theron's threat permanently," and he stood and moved to an ornate mirror on the wall, speaking words in a language Maya did not recognize, words that made the air thicken and the mirror glow. Theron's face appeared in the glass, smugness radiating from every feature, and Lucian said without preamble, "I call blood oath assembly. You sent assassins after a human under my protection. That is a violation of sanctuary law. I demand resolution by combat." Theron's expression shifted to mock confusion. "I sent no assassins, Draculecht. You are delusional. Perhaps the stress of raising an abomination has damaged your mind." "Then you will not mind submitting to a truth binding," Lucian said, and Theron's hesitation was brief but fatal. Truth bindings were ancient magic that made lying impossible, and his silence was confession enough. "Your silence speaks volumes," Lucian continued. "Meet me at the Hollows Arena at dawn, or be branded coward before the entire council. Your choice." Theron's face twisted with rage, but he was trapped. Refusing combat after such a public challenge would destroy his reputation and political power. "Accepted," he said through clenched teeth, and the mirror went dark. Lucian spent the hours before dawn preparing for combat, donning ancient armor of black steel etched with protective wards, taking up the weapon of his house, which was a longsword forged in the 12th century and inscribed with names of every Draculeshti who had wielded it. Maya watched him arm himself and said quietly, "You could die." And Lucian did not look at her. "If I do not fight, we all die slowly. Theron will pick us apart piece by piece until nothing remains. This ends one way or another." "Then let me fight with you," Maya said, standing despite her injury, and Lucian spun toward her. "No, absolutely not." "I am bound to you now," Maya insisted. "I can feel the changes already. I am stronger, faster. I can help." And Lucian crossed to her in 2 strides and cupped her face with hands that trembled. "You are human. One mistake and you are gone forever. I cannot lose you. And if you die, what happens to Nikolai?" Maya demanded. "What happens to me? What happens to everything we are building?" And Lucian had no answer, his jaw working soundlessly. They compromised finally. Maya would attend as his second, allowed to intervene only if Lucian was incapacitated. And she hated the compromise, but understood the logic. Understood that her new strength was nothing compared to centuries-old vampires. The Hollows Arena was a pit carved into volcanic glass, walls smooth and black and reflecting torchlight in fractured patterns, and tiers of stone seating surrounded it where hundreds of vampires gathered to watch, their eyes gleaming with anticipation for violence. Theron arrived flanked by supporters, vampires who shared his views on hybrid abominations and human contamination, and he wore armor of silver that caught light like captured moonlight. Cassandra stood at the arena's edge, her blind eyes somehow surveying the crowd, and she said with formal gravity, "Blood oath combat, first to yield or die, no interference from seconds unless primary combatant is incapacitated, begin." The fight was brutal from the first moment, 2 ancient vampires with centuries of combat experience, and Theron fought dirty immediately, producing hidden blades from his armor, coating his claws with poison that sizzled when it touched Lucien's skin. Lucien matched him blow for blow, his sword singing through air with deadly precision, but Maya could feel through their bond that he was protecting his injured wrist, the place where he had fed her his blood still raw and vulnerable, and Theron noticed with predatory focus. Theron targeted the weakness relentlessly, slashing at Lucian's wrist until he stumbled, and Maya screamed without conscious thought, terror flooding through the bond in both directions. Theron's laugh was cruel and triumphant. Your human made you weak, Draculesht. You should have let her die. She is a liability, a distraction, proof that you have gone soft, and he drove a blade toward Lucian's heart. Time seemed to slow, Maya's new hybrid enhanced senses processing everything with crystalline clarity, and she moved faster than she had ever moved in her life, throwing Lucian's dagger with strength she did not know she possessed. The blade embedded in Theron's shoulder, bone deep, and he howled with rage and pain, spinning toward Maya with murder in his eyes. But Lucian recovered and tackled him, both vampires crashing to the volcanic glass with earth-shaking impact. They grappled at the pit's edge, a tangle of limbs and fangs and flashing steel, and Lucian's voice was raw and broken when he said, "You killed Katerina. Admit it. Tell them all what you did." Theron laughed, even pinned beneath Lucien's weight. "Of course I killed her. The fool thought humans and vampires could coexist, thought love could bridge species. She was poisoning your mind and weakening our kind. I did us all a favor removing her." The entire arena heard through amplification spells woven into the stone, and gasps and shouts erupted from the watching vampires, and Cassandra's face went hard as marble. "Is this true?" she demanded, her voice cutting through chaos, and Theron realized his mistake too late. "She deserved it," he said. "She was making us weak." Lucien's roar shook the mountain itself. "You murdered my wife. You took Nikolai's mother. You destroyed our family." And he drove Theron to the ground with inhuman force, fangs bared for the killing strike. "Stop," a small voice said. Actual voice, not signing, cutting through the violence like a blade through silk, and everyone froze. Nikolai stood at the pit's edge, tears streaming down his face, and he said again in a voice hoarse from disuse, but absolutely clear, "Father, stop." Lucien looked staggered, his entire body going rigid with shock. Nikolai and his son met his eyes with ancient wisdom in a child's face. "If you kill him, you become him," Nikolai said, his voice gaining strength. "Mother would not want that. She would want justice, not murder. She would want you to be better." And Lucian's hands loosened on Theron's throat. Theron seized the moment of distraction, trying to scramble away, but council guards surrounded him instantly, a circle of implacable vampires blocking every escape. Cassandra moved forward, her presence commanding absolute attention. "Theron Vane, you are accused of regicide, conspiracy, attempted murder, and violation of sanctuary law. How do you plead?" "I did what was necessary for our survival," Theron shouted, his composure completely shattered. "The hybrid is an abomination. The human contaminates our bloodlines. I was protecting vampire purity." "You murdered a duchess and traumatized a child," Cassandra said, her voice cold as winter stone. "Guards, take him to the deep cells. His trial will be public and thorough." And as Theron was dragged away, he screamed, "You are all fools. The boy will destroy us. Hybrids are abominations that will end vampire supremacy." Nikolai stood taller, his small voice carrying across the arena. "I am not an abomination. I am my mother's son." And the arena erupted in applause that echoed off volcanic glass like thunder. Lucien climbed from the pit, moving like someone in a dream, and he dropped to his knees in front of Nikolai. "You spoke." And Nikolai nodded, suddenly shy now that the moment had passed. Maya said, "I should use my voice when it mattered." This mattered. Lucian pulled him into a crushing embrace, his shoulders shaking with sobs he could not control, and Maya joined them, wrapping her arms around both, and for a long moment the three of them existed in a bubble of intimacy, despite hundreds of watching vampires. Cassandra approached, her expression softer than Maya had ever seen. "The council owes you an apology, young prince, and a debt. You have shown wisdom beyond your years." And Nikolai's response was immediate and certain. "Then I ask one thing. Let humans and vampires make their own choices about relationships and family, like my mother wanted, like she died believing was possible. Cassandra considered him for a long moment. A child's wisdom, she said finally, spoken with adult conviction. We will discuss it. You have earned that much. And she left them alone in the center of the arena. Lucien stood still, holding Nikolai. You saved me, he said. Both of you saved me from becoming the monster Theron accused me of being. And Maya touched his face gently. Family saves family. That is what we do. That is what we are. They returned to Blackthorn Estate via shadow roads, Nikolai falling asleep in the car with his head on Maya's lap, one small hand holding Lucien's across the seat, and the journey felt different somehow, felt like traveling toward home rather than fleeing danger. Lucien broke the comfortable silence with careful words. The year is almost up. Your contract ends in 3 weeks. What will you do? Maya's heart clenched. I know. I have been trying not to think about it. Marcus needs me, but Nikolai needs me too. I feel torn between 2 families, 2 lives. What do you need? Lucien asked. His eyes on the road, but his attention completely focused on her through their bond, and Maya looked at him, at this impossibly ancient vampire who had somehow become essential to her existence. Honestly, she said, I need you both. I need this strange, impossible family we have built. But I do not know if that is allowed. I do not know if a human can just stay in a vampire's house forever without it meaning something specific. I am the Vampire King, Lucien said, a small smile touching his mouth. I decide what is allowed. And Maya felt her breath catch. Is that a proposal? She asked, and his smile widened. It is a possibility, an option we should discuss when you are not injured and exhausted. They arrived at Blackthorn as dawn broke, the estate gilded in pale gold light, and Nikolai woke and saw familiar towers and smiled genuinely for the first time in days. Home, he said, his voice still rough but beautiful, and Maya realized with sudden clarity that this was home more than anywhere else had ever been, more than her apartment or her childhood house or any place she had lived before. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the estate gates, sealed with the council's official mark, and Lucien opened it at breakfast, with Nikolai and Maya watching. In light of recent events, we are instituting reforms, the letter read. Human-vampire relations will be reviewed, existing prohibitions will be reconsidered, your input and expertise is requested, signed by Cassandra and 6 other council members. They are actually listening, Lucien said, wonder in his voice. Centuries of tradition, and they are willing to change. And Maya touched his hand. Katerina would be proud. You are making her dream real. Nikolai, who had been eating quietly, looked up. Mother is proud, he said with absolute certainty. I can feel it. She is happy we are together, all of us. And he took both their hands and squeezed. That night, Maya sat in Nikolai's room as he fell asleep, and the music box on his nightstand played its gentle melody. And in the swirling mist, Katerina's image appeared, smiling at them all with love and approval that transcended death itself. 3 weeks passed in a blur of normalcy that felt surreal after months of crisis, and Maya woke on the final day of her contract to find the mark on her wrist had faded to a silver scar, barely visible in morning light, and on her breakfast tray beside coffee and pastries sat a new contract, unsigned, the parchment cream and formal. She opened it with trembling hands and read terms that made her heart race. Permanent position as Nikolai's companion, full rights as a member of House Draculeshti, salary tripled, and one clause that made her breath stop completely. Optionally, the role may expand to include partnership with Lucien Draculeshti, should both parties consent. Lucien appeared in the doorway as though summoned by her racing thoughts, their bond humming with shared awareness, and he said quietly, You do not have to sign it. You have fulfilled your original contract. You are free to leave if you wish. What if I want to sign it? Maya asked, setting the contract down carefully, and Lucien crossed to her with careful steps, then I need to know it is not obligation driving you, not gratitude, not because Nikolai needs you, but because you genuinely choose this life. You are right, Maya said, standing to face him fully. I will not sign it. And Lucien's face fell, the careful mask cracking to reveal devastation beneath. But Maya continued before he could speak. Not yet, because I need to do something first. I need to go back to Oklahoma, see Marcus, settle my old life, figure out who I am outside of Blackthorn Estate, outside of this contract, and then I will sign knowing I chose it freely. Lucien absorbed this, his expression cycling through emotions too fast to track, and finally he nodded. How long do you need? And Maya considered. 1 month. I need 1 month to close that chapter of my life properly. Nikolai was devastated when she told him, his face crumpling with barely controlled tears, and he signed with shaking hands. You will come back, you promise. And Maya knelt to his level. I promise, sweetheart, 1 month and I will return. Promise, promise, he signed, using their private sign for absolute certainty. And Maya kissed his forehead. Promise, promise. You are stuck with me now. Lucien drove her to the Shadow Road gate himself, the journey silent but not uncomfortable, their bond carrying wordless communication that transcended speech. And before she stepped into the swirling darkness, he gave her a ring, black metal with a tiny thorn design etched around the band. So you can find your way back, he said, slipping it onto her finger where it fit perfectly. It is keyed to Blackthorn, and to me, you will always be able to find home. Maya looked at the ring, at Lucien's careful expression, at the vulnerability he was trying to hide, and she kissed him, slow and deep, and full of promise. 1 month, she whispered against his lips, and Lucien's arms tightened around her. I will be counting the days. Maya emerged from Shadow Roads in familiar Oklahoma countryside, the transition jarring after months in Romanian mountains, and everything looked smaller somehow, less significant, but also comfortingly ordinary. Marcus met her at a coffee shop in their hometown, and when he saw her, he pulled her into a crushing hug. You look different, he said, pulling back to study her face. Stronger, more confident. What happened to you out there? I grew up, Maya said, smiling at the simplicity and complexity of that statement. I found purpose. I saved a kid. I became part of something bigger than myself. Marcus was thriving. She discovered over coffee that stretched into lunch. New job as a physical therapy supervisor, new apartment with actual furniture, his arm fully healed and functional, and he talked about maybe dating again, maybe building a life beyond just survival. You are happy, Maya observed, and Marcus nodded. I am. Thanks to you. You saved me when those people took me. You made choices that protected me, even when it cost you. We protect each other, Maya said. That is what family does. And she meant it. Meant both her blood family and the family she had chosen at Blackthorn. She visited her mother's grave on a sunny afternoon, the headstone weathered but well-maintained, and she sat in grass that needed mowing and talked to stone and memory. I did something good, Mom, she said. I saved a kid who needed me. I found people who value me for exactly who I am. I think maybe that makes up for the mistakes I made. Maybe you would be proud. She visited her old nursing school, walking halls she had not entered in 10 years, and the dean remembered her immediately. Maya Chen, we were hard on you. And Maya nodded. I deserved it. I broke laws and betrayed trust. Perhaps the dean said, her expression thoughtful, but you were also a scared girl trying to save her mother. For what it is worth. I am sorry we did not see that. Sorry we could not help you find legal options. Maya left the meeting feeling lighter, feeling like chains she had carried for years had finally loosened, and she understood that Lucien had been right. She needed this closure, needed to face her past with adult eyes and forgive herself for choices made in desperation. 28 days later, because she could not wait the full month, Maya stood at Blackthorn's gates with her ring glowing warm against her skin, and the gates swung open as though the estate itself recognized her, welcomed her home. Nikolai was waiting, bouncing on his toes with barely contained energy, and when he saw her, he sprinted forward and crashed into her arms with enough force to knock her back a step. "You came back," he said, actual voice bright with joy. "I knew you would, but I was still scared." "I promised, did I not?" Maya said, holding him tight. "Promise, promise, remember." And Nikolai nodded against her shoulder. Lucien walked down the front steps slowly, his eyes locked on hers with intensity that made her breath catch, and Nikolai ran back to him. She came back. "Father, I told you she would," and Lucien's hand settled on his son's shoulder. "You did. You had more faith than I managed." Maya walked up the steps, pulling the contract from her bag. "I am ready to sign now." And Lucien's expression was carefully neutral. What changed? "I needed to know I was choosing this," Maya said, "not running from my old life, but choosing you, choosing Nikolai, choosing us, choosing this strange, beautiful, complicated family we are building." She signed in ink this time, her signature bold and certain, and Lucien signed below her name, his handwriting elegant and old-fashioned, and the contract glowed briefly then vanished, magic sealing their agreement in ways that transcended paper. Nikolai cheered, actually cheered with his voice, and Lucien cupped Maya's face with hands that trembled slightly. "Welcome home, Maya Chen," and Maya smiled through sudden tears. "Welcome home, Lucien Draculeshti." And they kissed as the sun set over Blackthorn, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. 6 months later, Blackthorn Estate had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Human staff now worked alongside vampires with structured schedules and fair wages. Maya had introduced new protocols including trauma counseling for Nikolai and wellness programs for all staff regardless of species. And the estate felt more alive, more vibrant, more like a home than a fortress. Nikolai was thriving, speaking fluently in both Romanian and English, laughing often at jokes only 8-year-olds understood, still shy in new situations, but opening up with encouragement. And he had started at a special academy for supernatural children, where he had made his first real friend, a werewolf girl named Luna, who thought vampires were cool and hybrids were even cooler. Lucien had begun implementing Katerina's peace initiatives with renewed determination, trade agreements with human governments, cultural exchange programs, anti-discrimination laws within vampire territories, and the progress was slow, opposed by traditionalists at every turn, but it was happening. Change was possible. Maya had become Lucien's unofficial advisor, attending council meetings where vampires twice her age listened to her opinions, negotiating treaties between species, and the council respected her mostly because Nikolai adored her, and she had proven her worth repeatedly. Maya and Lucien were together officially now, though vampire-human relationships remained controversial in traditionalist circles, and Lucien was careful, courtly, every bit the ancient gentleman in public, but in private he was tender, vulnerable in ways he had never allowed himself before. One night in his study, while Lucien read by firelight and Maya worked on policy proposals, she asked without looking up from her papers, "Do you regret this, us, the complications we bring to your life?" Lucien set down his book. "I regret 200 years of isolation. I regret not fighting harder for Katerina's vision while she lived. I do not regret a single moment since you walked into my life." And Maya looked up, "Even when I am difficult, when I challenge your authority, when I make things complicated." "Especially then," Lucien said. "You challenge me in ways I desperately needed. I have been stagnant for centuries. You make me grow, make me better." Maya closed her laptop and curled into his side on the sofa. "What happens when I get old? When I am wrinkled and slow and you are still ageless and beautiful?" And Lucien tensed slightly. "We will face that when we must." "You could turn me," Maya said, testing the words. "Make me like you. Give us forever." And Lucien's arm tightened around her. "I could, but I will not. Not unless you ask genuinely, and not for many years. You deserve to live as human first, to experience a natural lifespan, to make that choice from wisdom, not fear." And if I never ask, Maya whispered, if I choose to stay human, to age and die while you remain. And Lucian's voice was rough when he answered, then I will love you until your last breath and mourn you until my last. And Maya's throat tightened. That is the most romantic and depressing thing you have ever said. I contain multitudes, Lucian said with a small smile. And Maya laughed despite the tears in her eyes, kissed him with fierce tenderness, and let the future remain uncertain. During a council session 3 weeks later, a messenger arrived with unprecedented news. A human delegation from the United Nations wanted to establish formal diplomatic relations with vampire territories, wanted to create treaties and trade agreements and official recognition, and the chamber erupted in shocked conversation. It is revolutionary, Cassandra said, her blind eyes somehow surveying the chaos. Humans have never formally acknowledged our existence. This could change everything. But the message included a warning. A radical human faction has emerged, calling themselves the Purity Front, dedicated to eradicating all supernatural beings. They have already attacked a werewolf community in Canada, killed 17, including children. This is what we feared. Cassandra continued, exposure brings danger, brings humans who hate and fear what they do not understand. And Lucian stood, his presence commanding silence. Hiding did not keep us safe either. Katerina knew that. She believed transparency and cooperation were our only path to lasting peace. I vote we accept the UN delegation, but with maximum security protocols. The council voted, narrowly approving the diplomatic relations, and as the meeting ended, Lucian received a private letter, sealed envelope delivered by anonymous courier, and inside was a photograph of Nikolai at his school, circled in red ink, and a note in crude handwriting. The abomination lives. Not for long, signed Purity Front. Lucian's hands crushed the paper. Fury and terror flooding through his bond with Maya so intensely she gasped, and she crossed to him immediately. What is it? Show me. He showed her, and Maya's fear spiked sharp and cold, but also her resolve hardened into something unbreakable. We knew this would not be easy. We knew there would be people who hate what Nikolai represents. They are threatening our son, Lucian said, his voice deadly quiet. And Maya took his hand. Then we protect him. We increase security. We teach him to be careful. We face this together like we face everything. Nikolai appeared in the doorway, his hybrid senses having detected their distress, and he signed with his voice, I am not scared. You taught me to be brave. And Lucian knelt to his level. Brave does not mean unafraid. It means afraid and standing anyway. Can you do that? Nikolai nodded, his small face serious. I can stand. We all will. Together. And Lucienne pulled him close, pride and fear warring in his expression. That night, the three of them gathered in Nikolai's room, Maya reading a human fairy tale about a prince who learned to be kind, and Nikolai fell asleep mid-chapter, his music box clutched in small hands, the melody playing softly. Lucienne carried him to bed with infinite gentleness, tucked blankets around him with careful precision, and they stood in the doorway watching him sleep, watching his chest rise and fall, watching the peace on his face that came from feeling safe and loved. I never thought I would have this, Lucian said quietly. Family, peace, purpose beyond mere survival. And Maya leaned against him. It is not perfect peace. There is still danger, still people who want to destroy what we are building. But we face it together, Lucian said, and Maya nodded, together, always together, and they closed Nikolai's door softly, walked hand in hand to their shared chambers, their bond humming with shared determination. The moon rose over Blackthorn full and bright, painting the estate in silver light, and Nikolai's music box played its gentle melody, Katerina's image glowing in the mist, smiling at the family her son had found. And in the forest beyond the gates a shadow moved, watching, waiting, planning. The Purity Front insignia was carved into a tree at the forest edge, still smoking from the blade that made it, and unseen eyes studied the estate with cold calculation, counting guards, noting patterns, preparing for violence that would shatter the fragile peace. 1 year after Maya signed her permanent contract, she stood in the council chamber, no longer as a companion, but as Blackthorn's official human ambassador, and she presented a bill she had spent months drafting, the Katarina Accord: full legal protection for hybrid children and interspecies families, recognition of mixed relationships, anti-discrimination laws with actual enforcement. The council debated for 3 hours, traditionalists arguing against change, progressives arguing for evolution, and finally Cassandra called for a vote, and the Katarina Accord passed 9 votes to 2, and the chamber erupted in applause. Nikolai, now 8 years old, watched from the gallery, beaming with pride, and after the session ended, Lucian found Maya in a quiet corridor. "You did it," Katarina's dream made real. "We did it," Maya corrected. "All of us. You and me and Nikolai and every person who believed change was possible," and Lucian kissed her with fierce joy. That night there was celebration at Blackthorn, humans and vampires mingling, laughing, learning from each other, barriers dissolving in wine and music and shared hope. And Nikolai played with Luna in the garden, their laughter carrying through open windows. Lucienne and Maya danced in the grand hall to music that sounded like hope, and as the song ended, Lucienne whispered against her hair, "Marry me." And Maya pulled back. "What?" And Lucienne's expression was vulnerable and certain. "Not now, not tomorrow, but someday when you are ready. Marry me. I want forever with you, in whatever form that takes." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "You are serious? You want to marry a human? Deal with all the complications and controversy?" And Lucienne cupped her face. "I have never been more serious. I want you, permanently, officially, in every way possible." "Yes," Maya said, kissing him through tears and laughter. "Someday, yes, when the time is right. Yes." And they held each other as the party swirled around them, as their families celebrated victories hard won and fragile. Nikolai ran up. "Are you happy?" And Maya and Lucian answered in unison, "Yes." And Nikolai hugged them both. "Good. Me too. I am happy too." And the three of them stood together, silhouetted against ballroom light, a family forged in shadow and blood and choice. A family that should not exist by any traditional standard, but existed anyway. Beautifully, defiantly, completely. The moon rose higher, the celebration continued, and somewhere in the darkness beyond Blackthorn's walls, the Purity Front sharpened their weapons and prepared for war. But inside the estate, 3 people held each other and chose hope over fear, chose love over hate, chose to believe that the world could change because they had already changed it, one impossible choice at a time. And the story continued, would always continue, because families like theirs did not end. They evolved, they grew, they survived.